really do think that something like this ancestral health template is kind of the other things may work. A vegan diet may work for some people, but I think that kind of ancestral model, the sleep, the food, the community, the smart movement, I really think that that's kind of where it is, or at least that's a damn good start. Like maybe we iterate somewhere, but we have to pick somewhere to start. So that seems like a good place to start. But I recognized we need the ability to kind of triage people and figure out who's really sick. And then we need a super effective intervention. And part of that intervention is going to require doctors and health coaches, physical medicine doctors, chiros, the whole gamut to really help those people. And then long term, we need some sort of a payer solution.
At Active Life, we believe that the healthcare clinic of the future is the gym.
Everybody starts with the best case scenario in mind.
Never sell anything to anybody who is not in the market for what you have.
The only reason we work out is to create the opportunity to recover.
And the healthcare provider of the future is the coach.
And this is why you guys need to get paid well, because what you're doing is really, really hard work.
Robb Wolf, welcome to the Active Life podcast. It's an honor.
Hey, huge honor to be here. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. You wrote the Paleo Solution in 2010. Well, released it in September 2010.
Right.
And at that time, I was in the most, what I would call peak inflection point of my trajectory. I had just graduated from chiropractic school about a year earlier. I was trying to figure out what I thought the best way to live was. And it was difficult for anything to influence the way that I felt about any of that until I read the Paleo Solution, because it made so much sense to me. And for people who don't know anything about the Paleo Solution, that was when you effectively introduced the rationale behind the paleo diet, right? I mean, to keep it really simple.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go into the depths of the paleo diet. What I want to really hear about is, how does one come to write a book that has an impact? Behind me is a book that I wrote, Turn Pro, the ethical guide to the fitness professional's guide to ethical sales and career fulfillment. And it's not the Paleo Solution, right? It's not blazing a field. I would love to hear from you how you write a book that does that.
I mean, I would love to paint myself as some sort of like Elon Musk, seer through walls, but I had a passion for this topic. Like I've always been interested in health, and it was kind of an interesting confluence. Where I landed and the work that I was doing, there were movements that were growing online. And so just the fact that the internet existed was a big deal, but it existed in this way where it was still rewarding, unique, but seemingly beneficial content. Like we weren't quite in this world where it's like, well, you're getting a little too big for your britches and you don't align with all of the big picture narrative. And so we need to start trimming your stuff. So a lot of the success that I've had, I was just kind of at the right place, the right time. I had had an opportunity to become a reasonably effective communicator. The material in the Paleo Solution originally started as I think originally it was like a 12-page guide for the seminars that I was doing, but I started doing these seminars all around the world, and I just kept adding to this guide. And the goal was to send this out to folks so that they could get a first pass through the material that I hoped to share with them, so that they could see it once, and then I would talk about it, and then they could be better informed and ask better questions. And this thing just grew over time. I think when finally like a legitimate book idea was put before me, the guide was maybe 45 to 50 pages long. It was a pretty substantial chunk of information at that point. And somebody said, you should tell your story and, share this whole concept. And because we had been running a gym, I had kind of like my clinic, my incubator there to work with people and see, well, this works and this doesn't really seem to work. And then, the stories that I got from all of these people, literally tens of thousands of people that I got to travel and go meet. And I had the answers to most of the pushback, most of the questions. You know, it was when I did my seminar, I would wrap up one sentence and I just knew that like the question was coming. And it became this kind of fun thing. You know, you're a little bit of performance art. And so, I mean, I was at the right place, the right time. I was really passionate about helping people. Whatever detractors folks may have around like the ancestral health concept, it's kind of a reality. I helped a lot of people. Like you can't just spin out complete BS and, you know, have people sing your praises for all that long. You know, it was able to help kids and older folks and athletes and learned a lot along the way. Like not everything that I recommended helped people, but what I definitely was willing to do was get in and say, well, why didn't this work? And, you know, what can we do to fix this? So it tempered my ego. And so I think I was willing to be adaptable. I was in the right place at the right time. The internet was very amenable at that point. It was kind of like, what's the Chronicles of Narnia, like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I think like the second to last book is The Magician's Apprentice. And like Narnia is created by this, you know, this kind of godlike being. But anything, the world is so new and fertile that anything that lands grows. Like there was like a lamppost that fell on the ground and it grew into a lamppost and all this stuff. And I feel like that early part of the internet, if you had anything worthwhile, it just, everybody was hungry for information and link backs and collaboration and everything. And so that was a lot of it. You know, even if none of this concept had been released now, like let's say the world had never heard of like the paleo diet, there was just kind of like keto and low carb, but it released it at this point. I don't know that it would have been as successful because there's so much more control over what people are saying around health and anything that goes outside the standard narrative, both for health, but even say like some of the climate change implications of like animal husbandry and stuff like that, which forced me to write the other book that I did, Sacred Cow, trying to address the ethical, environmental, and kind of ethical health, environmental, and ethical considerations of a meat inclusive food system. So I don't know if that was a great answer, but there definitely wasn't, you know, like one piece to this thing. There was a lot of timing involved, definitely a lot of hard work, being willing to grow and adapt and whatnot. But honestly, it was a fair amount of serendipitous luck around the timing and the infrastructure that I had to facilitate what I wanted to do.
You know, one of the things that I try to do when I'm talking to people like yourself is listen for common themes. You know, listen for like, okay, what Robb just said, was that similar to, for example, what John Berardi might have said in the past? Mm-hmm. And the answer is absolutely. It's everybody ends up getting lucky because they created the circumstance in which luck would be most likely to happen. And I would love to share an example with you about that. And then I have a question about something that you brought up. First of all, my pushback on the paleo diet was, I can eat tuna on this diet. I doubt the Paleolithic men were catching tuna. And one of my buddies was like, then don't eat tuna. And I was like, all right, fine. So that was the extent of my pushback.
Right.
But, you know, it was the example I like to think about when I talk to people about luck is, luck is involved in anything. To suggest that there's no luck would be an egregious overlook of what actually happened. But if we took 2 dice and we said, we're going to roll these dice, pick a number, and you said 7, and someone who has no idea what the odds of a 7 landing are said 2, you would be lucky more often than they would.
Right.
And so it's putting yourself in the situation to get lucky. I think that that's a really important thing for people to take away from that. That's what I keep taking away from it. It's like you look for the false peak where someone's gonna be like, oh, I did this thing. No, it's I did all of the things to put myself in a position to get lucky. So you mentioned that you found some things you were telling people didn't help people. And I think that that's an endearing quality that I know that you have. I've listened to on other shows is your contrition about, I'm not always going to be right. What is something that you told people that wasn't helpful, and how do you navigate acknowledging that you made a mistake?
Oh man, so I have a particular love for folks that have complex gut issues, autoimmunity. They've run the gamut of like standard of care medicine, and they're still sick. They still have problems. Those are my people, because that is me. Like my gut health is far better than what it was 23, 24 years ago when I first embarked on this, but I still have little niggling things that I keep, tinkering and fiddling with. And so the crowd that really, was center of the bullseye for me, not great metabolic health, some autoimmune disease, some gut issues, really complex, and a low carb diet with some eye towards circadian biology, getting them to sleep better and then getting them doing smart movement. It was magic for these people, like incredible, huge weight loss, massive health improvements. And so when you see someone lose, say, like 100 or 150 pounds, but then you have kind of a stud athlete, either male or female, come and start working with you, and they just want to lean out a little bit. And it's like, well, we maybe could carve 5 pounds off this person before we see retrograde performance from low body fat. Shoot, if low carb can peel 150 pounds off somebody, then clearly it could, move 5 pounds off of somebody. And then, 2 months down the road, they're actually chubbier and kind of puffy and edemic and retaining water, and their sleep is disturbed and the retrograde performance. And it's like, well, how the hell did we get here? And it's like, well, this person's doing high motor, super intense workouts 3 to 6 days a week, and low carb for them may mean 200 grams of carbs a day versus 600, but it definitely doesn't mean 20 grams of carbs like our sedentary, desk-bound, autoimmune person. So that was just something that, there were interesting iterations around that. When we define something, we call low carb like 20 grams, let's just say 50 grams or less of carbs per day. So you get stuck in that. And what works for the sedentary individual for a variety of reasons, mainly appetite control, I think, and also maybe modifying some of the gut microbiota stuff if people have some sort of GI issues, but really restricting the carb intake seems to be beneficial for a lot of folks. But what I lost in that for a while was that, with kind of standard of care, American Council of Sports Medicine input, like a hard charging male athlete, 175, 180 pounds, they need 600 grams of carbs a day. And that may work for a lot of people. It absolutely does. But for some people, it doesn't. And what they benefit from is some degree of carbohydrate restriction. It gives them a more even energy level. They don't have the highs. They don't have the lows. Maybe some of their systemic inflammation improves. But they're eating 200 grams of carbs a day. And maybe we shift towards a better qualitative source. Now they're eating 1/3 the carbs they used to eat. They're probably eating more fat. And so in total, at an individual level, this person has had a really profound shift in their macronutrient intake. But compared to all the standards that we have, is that a low carb diet? Well, by the written in stone standards of the keto-verse, no, it's not. But then for that individual, due to their activity level and the amount of muscle mass they carry and everything, yeah, it is really significant. And it took me a while to untangle that and to still, I think one of the big challenges that I face, and I suspect it's similar for you, is folks benefit enormously from simplicity, particularly at the beginning of changing things, But that simplicity can also get turned into like dogma, nearly religious dogma. And so it's almost like using a microscope where you need to go from the high level to the low level. Like the general recommendation, hopefully it gets 85% of the people some significant degree closer to the bullseye. But 15% of people, it may be absolutely contraindicated. It's like absolutely the wrong thing. Or for a bunch of people, there's some degree of tweaking that you need to do to continue to get them to that middle. So there's a balance that needs to be brought in between, we can't blow people out of the water with huge complexity right at the beginning, because they're just like, I can't do this. I'm overwhelmed and I'm done. But then at the same time, we can't allow those simple heuristics to become the whole offering that we have, because then we get no customization. We have no room for like, well, you're kind of an outlier, so we need to do something different with you. And that's fine. Like we're smart enough to figure that out, if we just pay attention.
Yeah. And for me, that was a lot of, I used to own gyms. That was my last life. And it was, the only thing that matters is how fast you can work out, how much weight you can lift, and all these kinds of things. And then what I started to see was, well, some of the fittest, quote, fittest people who were in our gym couldn't go out for a run. When the rest of the members went for a run, they had to be on the rower because their knees hurt so bad.
Right.
Some of our fittest members would have to warm up for 20 minutes before they would do the pull-ups, because otherwise their shoulders would be screaming. And some of the fittest members weren't able to leave the gym and go home and play on the ground with their young kids. And, without the moaning and groaning of going down, going up. And I had to backtrack on what I said, because I taught these people these things, and I had to apologize for it. And I had to back up and say, there's a place for that. It's just not where we put it.
Right.
And I also relate to what you're saying when we put things out to the general marketplace that need to be simple enough to get somebody's attention. And then the idea is that they negotiate off of that. And we have to meet them where they negotiate to. So, for example, I wonder how often a car or a home is bought for the price that it's listed at. But the price that it's listed at allows somebody to say, I'm in the market for this house or for this car. And then the conversations start to happen around, how much of this house or this car am I really willing to pay for? And right. I see it no different with the paleo diet, right? If I'm going to jump onto the paleo diet, for example, maybe I need more carbohydrates than what would come from that. And the same thing with the kind of exercise that we design. So I find that to be an interesting parallel. I want to segue that into how we do that for audiences of people who are so far in the opposite direction, and they're a cruise ship that's been heading in their direction for a long time. And now we got to turn them around. And it's easy for you. It's easy for me. We're on jet skis. I'm like, oh, yesterday I thought that was a good idea. Today it's not. And I'm okay with telling you it was a bad idea and we're going to turn. But they built their entire food system around that. And the number one I think about is schools. I have a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And I'm on a committee, the health and wellness committee, and physical fitness and nutrition is a subcommittee that I'm on. The goal I have for the committee for the end of the year is that we've identified 10 ingredients, just 10, that we don't want in the foods that we serve our kids. And that by the end of the year, we've been able to hold the district accountable to no longer ordering foods that have those ingredients in them. That's not what I want, but it's what I think we can do.
Right.
I'm curious your thoughts on that and how you take that from where we are to farm sourced, organic produce, free range animal products, and no processed food. How do we go from ice cream to that?
I think like what you've done is actually a great example. I mean, you have to be really, really pragmatic with this stuff. And I've never in my life contemplated getting involved in like any degree of like political anything, like being on a committee, but then you have kids and you're like, yeah, yep. Like I might actually have to do something here, but
if you don't, all you get to do is complain about what people aren't doing. And you're one of the people who aren't doing it.
Right. It's interesting. I read an article recently, and if you remind me after we're done, I'll ping it to you. But it's this game theory look at problem solving, and the vast majority of people try to solve problems by adding things to the situation. They add this, they add that, and this is kind of our current political environment. Like our politicians don't sit down and say, what laws can we remove from the books that would actually make lives better? We just keep adding, and it just adds complexity. Well, this law intersects with that, and it creates all these crazy challenges. So I think what you did, which is like, hey, let's draw a line in the sand around some stuff that is easily defensible that we don't want in our kids' food system. And that way you're not necessarily getting into the vegan versus meat eater and like all these like religious wars. Like you find some things that we have the Venn diagrams overlap enough. And I would assume it's some things like maybe high fructose corn syrup or some things like that. You know, it's like, okay, we can all agree on these.
It's high fructose corn syrup. It's, you know, rapeseed oil. It's the hateful eight oils. It's going to be high fructose corn syrup. It's going to be all those kinds of ingredients. Yes, exactly.
And you know, the fascinating thing is if we construct something smart like that, like what does canola oil end up with? Well, it ends up with kind of shitty baked goods, you know? And so if you do this thing properly, you end up nuking a lot of stuff by happenstance, you know, and instead of creating this trench warfare where every stinking item, you know, you have to do this like big scientific consensus. And it's like, well, some people agree and some people don't. And I think that is where like, you know, parents and just folks in general need to be fairly pragmatic. And man, I historically have not been real good at that. You know, I'm kind of like, oh, screw it. You know, I'll just go this way and I'll find a way, you know, the market will figure out a way around it. And, you know, we'll just upend this whole thing. But then when people send their kids to school and to daycare and they're living real lives, it's like, oh, that's not so easy. We actually do want to affect the qualitative nature of the experience these kids have in particular. And so how do we go about doing that? Do we create this like super contentious, you know, problem, or do we have a smart thing that removing crap from a situation, like intuitively, I think that makes a lot of sense to most folks. It's like, okay, I can get behind this, you know, and really at the end of the day, if pearled barley with a little bit of butter and some cinnamon on it becomes the replacement to like some sort of Franken food, you know, processed a Cinnabon, you know, it's like, okay, that's a win. Like that's a win, you know, that's a win across the board. So, I mean, hats off to you for doing that. And I've been reconsidering so much of what I do in light of this game theory piece, which is like, when can we approach a problem and actually remove things from the situation and improve it versus just trying to add more complexity, add these things that oftentimes become these super contentious topics. So, I mean, really hats off to you on that. It's super smart.
Well, thank you. You know what it is? I think before I had kids who were in a school system, I think that the way you described that you like to typically think about things is my set point too. It's like, okay, well, let's just scorch the earth and deal with what happens.
Right.
But now it's like, okay, well, that's not going to influence the change. And my kids are still going to go to school and be given food that's not food. And then when they come home and they want it, I'm going to have to explain to them why that's not food. And so I started having conversations around like, can we eliminate this? Like you said, like, can we eliminate the muffins that come in the wrappers? No, some of the kids eat this. And can we eliminate that? No. Like, all right, can we go farm to table? No, it's really difficult to find that. Okay. I understand all of the problems that you're describing. Can we agree that we don't want high fructose corn syrup in our kids' foods? Yeah, we want that out. Great. Can we agree that there are seed oils that require processing that makes it dangerous for people to eat? Yes. Okay. So then can we just all agree that we want to eliminate those things from
that out?
And they're like, yeah. I'm like, oh, little do you know what is coming off of that menu.
Right.
So, but good. We all agreed that they should come off. So, how do we help people who have achieved a level of certainty, have lived a life that others maybe can't necessarily relate to yet, to start living that life? And I'm going to give you an example. I got an email today from one of our students, and he said to me that he wants to be an influence of change in his family. There's a lot of negative food behavior in his family. There's a lot of negative physical rehabilitation in his family. There's a lot of lack of fitness in his family. And what he was expressing to me is, I've lived my entire life to be the opposite of that. And I've seen the reward. And I want to be able to help my family see the same reward. And my response to him was that his family might not be able to hear it from him because they might think he can't possibly relate to me. And my recommendation, and I want to hear what you would do, My recommendation to him was, if you don't already have one, start a social media account because your family will follow you. Don't worry about talking to your family. Talk to yourself as if you were the older version who did struggle with these things, so that your family can see that you can empathize, find commonality with them, understand you've actually come through it. It's not just you're naturally, this is easy for you,
Right.
and then allow them to approach you. But that's a very long game. And I'm curious if you would have advised someone like that anything different.
No. And I mean, the first thing that popped to my mind was, we're almost always a pariah within our own family. Like, sometimes parents will take their kids seriously and really respect, oh, okay, you know, this kid's super sharp, and they put the parental overseer thing aside, and they recognize that their kid has some insight that perhaps they don't. But it's a rare thing. So I think, you know, at the end of the day, I think that clearly we all want our families to be healthier because we don't want to see them suffer. I knew for so long coming, you know, that the losing both of my parents was going to suck, you know, and it's going to happen no matter what at some point, assuming I outlive them. But, you know, it was a 20-year period where I was like, any day, like literally any day it could have been. So I probably had my parents on borrowed time for like 20 years, which is a little nerve wracking in some ways. And I think that that's some of what, you know, people are trying to avoid in this situation. And also they're just sick and hurting and all that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, I think also folks like this person you talk to, there's just a desire to help in general. And so I think that recommendation to start reaching out to people and take the learnings and the experiences from that family and then apply it to the world at large, because there's plenty of other people out there. And so you may become the inspiration that changes the behavior of somebody else's parents, you know? And so the other thought, I really like, it would not have occurred to me to make the recommendation that you did. The other thought that I had is, you know, like there's a Dr. David Perlmutter who's written like Grain Brain and, you know, really amazing guy. He's a top of the food chain neurologist. Parents respond to that guy because he's older and he's a neurosurgeon and all this stuff. He has all the bona fides and everything. He's got a really accessible book. And so I think oftentimes that is a possibility. And it maybe is even something where like you send it to your family anonymously. This isn't from Jimmy, you know, it's like Amazon just delivers it and you can get it delivered anonymously. And it's like, I didn't have anything to do with that, you know? So you find somebody that might be, just connects with the person, you know, and Terry Walls is another great example, you know, this female, high level doctor who had autoimmune disease and was wheelchair bound and then, you know, has rehabilitated herself with diet and lifestyle and everything, like finding somebody that might be that inspiration. And so it kind of offloads that educational part and maybe even doing it anonymously, because if they know it comes from the kid, then that, you know, that's liable to be problematic. But that would be my only other thoughts in that, is try and do like outsource the change versus you being specifically the catalyst for change. Cause it's tough within a regular family scenario. Like really tough.
I like that idea. I'm going to try it and I'm going to let you know how it goes with someone.
Cool. And well, I'm going to file that away of encouraging people, just go start helping anyone, you know, because the idea behind that for me came from, I wasn't doing it to influence my family. I was doing it because I wanted to start a business, and I started telling my story to people, and it was resonant. And before I did that, when I would talk to my parents, they were like, well, you're a personal trainer. My parents or my friends or my family, you're a personal trainer. And they wouldn't say it, but you could feel it. You could feel that they were like, this stuff is easy for you. It's how you've always lived your life. Right.
And it wasn't until I started really expressing how difficult a lot of this stuff is for me and how difficult this stuff was and what I've done to overcome that difficulty so that now my new difficulty is this. That's when they started coming to me and asking questions. And so I found that to be a helpful thing to teach somebody else to do.
No, that's great. And I mean, it really speaks to your, so you mentioned common threads. We don't know each other particularly well, but I've already seen 3 or 4 different situations where you've had this like, emotional intelligence of like an IQ of like 200. Like your emotional intelligence is operating at a super high level. And I got to say mine is a learned, parroted thing. It is not an instinctual thing. Like I didn't arrive in the world with great emotional intelligence. I'm empathic for people. I care about people, but I'm kind of the blunt instrument with that stuff. So like, it's really laudable what you've figured out, the ways to connect with people and kind of outsource this stuff so that what I've noticed here is a really great ability to conflict mitigate while still moving the whole process forward. Well, like, let's not focus on trying to get meat in the school lunches, but if we remove everything else, then all of a sudden there's this kind of vacuum there where they're like, maybe we'll get some organic chicken 3 times a week. Right. It's just kind of like, what else are you going to stick on there? So yeah, it's really cool.
Well,
it's really cool.
I appreciate you mentioning that. And I will tell you that it is definitely learned for me too. And if you have, I'll tell you a brief story. I think you'll like it. In 2016, I was running a business with a partner and we were struggling. I mean, we were not making a lot of money and I was working 16-hour days. And I wanted to hire a mentor who could teach me something. I have phenomenal parents. I love my parents and they're just too close. You know, despite being successful, they are just too close. So I needed somebody who I haven't lived with my whole life to show me a better way. And we hired this mentor who I couldn't afford, but had to do it. And in the first meeting, he knew us. And he says to me, your biggest problem is the way you treat people. And I said, what are you talking about? I treat everybody exactly how I want to be treated. And he said, that's the problem. You're a fucking psychopath. He said, and most people don't want to be treated like a fucking psychopath. So you need to start treating people the way that they want to be treated. And that for me was like, that spun me off on a really dark month of my life that my wife can attest to, like meditating for hours a day when I don't really enjoy meditating, just to try to figure out, who am I? Why did I think these are the things that I wanted? And how do I communicate with people in a way that makes them feel like I'm there for them instead of being there for me? Because that's all I ever wanted, was to help people.
Right.
And so what you're experiencing today in our conversation is 6 years of intentional practice, trying to get better at that. So I appreciate the validation that that's happening.
You've done amazing work. Like it's really a high level that you're functioning at with that. Like I'm taking notes here that I'm like, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. This is a good insight. So yeah, hats off to you.
Well, thank you.
Seriously.
I appreciate that. And I'm also fascinated by, when I watch documentaries or when I listen to people like you tell me that you don't feel like you have that skill, it always makes me wonder, how the hell is somebody successful without it?
Right.
And right. I mean, like, how do you feel like I think if I was still the version of me from years ago, I would be as polarizing to the community that we're in as Donald Trump was to the United States.
Right.
Except there might not be anybody who knows who I am. How do you do it without trying to figure out that nuance? Active lifers, I have good news for the fitness professionals out there. If you are ready to build a rock solid coaching and training practice, the best place to start is in the Active Life Seminar. Hosted live and online, you're going to learn our signature 9-point movement assessment system, rules for training and programming with pain, and how to make sales feel natural, and so much more. Check out the link in the show notes for more information.
Well, and I think that this is just this a couple of thoughts. One, I may have constructed my life in a way where I've adapted around the need to further develop that skill set, so that's a possibility. Another possibility is there, I do old guy Brazilian jiu-jitsu and, there's white belts that are really, really good at some things and then not that good at other things. Like we were doing some clinch takedown work the other day and this kid had a good wrestling background and I was all ears. I'm like, dude, you're running this gig because I'm okay at clinch and takedown, but this is what this guy is. He has 12, 13 years of Greco training. So it's like
grabbing your neck and your ankle at the same time.
What am I going to have to say that's going to be insightful here? Like I'm the student in this situation. And I think that that's something to remember, is that there are, near infinite gradations in this stuff. And, so I've maybe developed it. I definitely am much more collegial, and, instead of firing off, say, like an email response as soon as it lands in my inbox, I'll wait a day. And, so some stuff like that, like just learning, I was very much a scorched earth kind of individual in the past. And I've learned it's like, okay, sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's good, both, on like a moralistic level. And sometimes it's just actually playing to my own hubris and my own ego, and like some distance and some time to reflect. Like the email response that comes 23 hours later is markedly different than what it had been if it came 23 seconds after finishing reading the thing, So I've definitely learned some stuff like that, but it's also, my kids are a little younger than yours. We're homeschooling, so I haven't been thrown into the jaws of needing to change some other scenario there, And so I've kind of papered over and adapted in a way that has allowed me to remain less, still a white belt potentially, or maybe a blue belt in that stuff, whereas you're brown headed towards black in that stuff. Yeah.
Is there anyone in your life who holds you in check?
Definitely my wife. And I mean, honestly, my kids too. One thing that we have started doing about a year ago. So my kids are 7 and 9. Once a week, usually on Sundays, we have a family meeting, and it's very similar to a board meeting. And we learned this from a guy that we met, Garrett Gunderson, who he does like wealth management, but a bunch of other stuff. But he put together, like, he has a family constitution, and it's really interesting, what everybody's values are and what they're invested in. It's really interesting. But they also do a family meeting, and on that family meeting, we tell each member of the family tells somebody else something that they really appreciated from the week. And it's not just kind of like, oh, Dad, your beard looks good today. It's like, you have to really think about it. We're not done with it until we actually do some hard work. And also there's each member of the family tells every other member of the family something that maybe they could do better. And, one of the things that my kids have given me feedback about is, so they're really, both of them geeked out right now on trying to train animals. Like the one kid is into cats, the other kid is into dogs, and their harnesses and training videos and all this stuff. And it's really cool because they're actually really passionate about it. But they try to do these giant steps. It's like, okay, we just got a harness for the cat yesterday, and now they're expecting that we're going to take the cat on a walk in downtown Kalispell tomorrow. And I'm like, it's not going to happen. We need these there's a bunch of little steps that are going to happen along the way with that. And my delivery of that, because I get busy and I, just want things to be easy for myself, my delivery with like, hey, we need incremental steps has been gruff. And so my kids give me feedback about like, Dad, you could be more kind about the way that you talk about that stuff. I'm like, absolutely, I can. So, I mean, definitely my kids, definitely my wife, the fact that I have an online persona. I mean, it's an interesting time right now where in some ways I think it's kind of bad. Like the cancel culture thing is so pervasive that there's a bunch of stuff that I think would potentially be valuable to say, even just in like people being thick-skinned and resilient, that I just don't, because of fear of reprisal and blowback and stuff like that. And then there's other situations where I'm just being a disconnected prick, and people will be like, hey, that wasn't cool. And I'll reflect on it. I'm like, okay. So, I mean, I definitely do get a lot of feedback from, my business interactions. We have our main business. I'm part of this Element team, which has grown a lot. And so even though I'm a co-founder, I'm a part of that whole team that now has like 25 people in it. And so I can't just be this like petty tyrant, like doing my own stuff. I actually plug into that whole thing in a healthy, functional way, particularly if I companies are successful when they're massively pathological on the back end, but it's not fun for anybody, and I've been on the receiving end of that. So I don't want to be that person. I've had two main mentors that ended up being huge narcissists. And I mean, like ICD-10, like diagnosable narcissism, like maybe borderline personality thrown in. And I learned a lot about how I didn't want to be in those situations. So those are definitely the different areas of feedback. Family, being at jiu-jitsu is really good because people pick up on your energy and your intentionality immediately. And I would say most folks that I train with really like training with me because I'm a good training partner. Like I'm there to make myself better, but I'm there equally. I'm going to help my partner improve, because if they get better, then I'll get better. And so jiu-jitsu is interesting in that if you're getting the crap beat out of you a lot, it may be because you're kind of a dick and people are kind of like trying to shave the rough edges off, and so I definitely get a lot of feedback there.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the mentors in the business and the tyrants on the back end. I forget the word that you used. It was more eloquent than mine, but I told my mentor this week, I said, I want Active Life to be Apple, but I don't want to be Steve Jobs. Right. I want people to enjoy working here. And so it's finding that happy place where both can happen, where you can be enough authoritative that people understand you're confident, you know where we're going and how we're going to get there, and enough diplomatic and democratic that you allow people to influence your thought and to change direction when appropriate. So this leads me to, a lot of what I feel like you and I have in common is the thrill of conflict and the welcomeness of like, oh, this is a rebellious act. And for that reason, I don't even necessarily like this thing and I'm going to choose this fight.
Right.
You talk about choosing health as an act of rebellion. Expand on that, please.
I really see it. And this is, we launched this idea before the pandemic, and a little bit of the piggyback off of that. When we moved to Reno back in 2010, 2011, I was there maybe 3 weeks, and a guy reached out to me who he identified himself as Greenie, and he was part of this medical clinic, and they really liked my work, and he wanted to meet me. And I went to this clinic, and there were my books in there and Gary Taub's books. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, this is really weird, and Greenie ended up being Dr. Jim Greenwald, this kind of famous, now retired orthopedic surgeon. Like he within orthopedic surgery circles, like this guy has been a real mover and shaker and is very well respected, but they were just wrapping up a 2-year pilot study with the Reno Police and Fire Department where they had used my work and some other folks' work to help identify police and firefighters at exceptionally high risk for cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And once they were identified, then they got a health coach. They were put on kind of an ancestral diet type template. We did the best we could to modify their sleep and exercise, but that pilot study ended up saving the city of Reno $22 million with a 33-to-1 return on investment.
That's pretty good.
And I was like, holy smokes, we are going to transform medicine, and 15 years later, 11 years later, we haven't transformed medicine. We've had a little bit of success with this place. But what I learned there is that some smart screening to find the highest risk people and then really focus on helping those folks. And I really do think that something like this ancestral health template is kind of the other things may work. A vegan diet may work for some people, but I think that kind of ancestral model, the sleep, the food, the community, the smart movement, I really think that's kind of where it is, or at least that's a damn good start. Like maybe we iterate somewhere, but we have to pick somewhere to start. So that seems like a good place to start. But I recognized we need the ability to kind of triage people and figure out who's really sick. And then we need a super effective intervention. And part of that intervention is going to require doctors and health coaches, physical medicine doctors, chiros, the whole gamut to really help those people. And then long term, we need some sort of a payer solution, which that's a whole other long story. We actually did a bunch of work with the Chickasaw Nation that I really thought was going to be like the thing, but they ended up kind of pulling this program just in-house instead. And so maybe someday they'll crack that open to the world. But this thing suggested, the whole process suggested to me that there was this opportunity to really circumvent the mainstream medical system. And it's not that you don't go to a doctor when you need it, or you don't go to a hospital when you need it, but I used to have a saying that the gym is primary care medicine, because a well-run gym, you're going to learn about sleep and food. You'll have community. You'll get some exercise. Going to the doc in the box or going to your family doctor, to me, that's secondary and tertiary medicine. Like, you're already sick. There's already a problem. We've already gone down this path. So that's my whole notion around, making your health an act of rebellion. And again, that was before, when all that I was trying to do, it seemed monumental then, but all that I was trying to do was get people to opt out of the sick care system. Mm-hmm. And now post-pandemic, and again, I think everybody's like so COVID fatigued. I won't go into this really deep, but now with like mandates and all this stuff, the sick care system is coming for us now. It's no longer a story of trying to just opt out. Now it's coming for us. It may destroy your ability to make a living or go shopping and a whole host of other things. So this is where the idea that we really need a rebellion around health, and it should be a peaceful and nonviolent one, but we need to stick some flags in the sand and not bend on some of this stuff if we are to keep moving forward, or at least just kind of maintain the progress that we've had in these areas. So
the entire time you were talking about that, I felt that ball of energy right at the bottom of my throat, at the top of my belly, that worked its way all the way up to right below my mouth, and I just kept choking it down because I wanted to agree with you very, very, very hard on a lot of it. And there is one part of it that I see as a rough edge that I would love to push on, if you're okay with it.
Please, yeah.
One of my beliefs is that the gym is the healthcare clinic of the future. Unfortunately, because of the inconsistency with which gyms are run, it is not the healthcare clinic of today. And even gyms that are well run, extremely well run, I see them as fulfilling the full breadth of what fitness can be. And I think that the full breadth of what fitness can be, when partnered up with the full breadth of what medicine can be, still don't make a Venn diagram. And there is a space between the two of them. So, for example, I'll give you, I don't know if you know Dr. Gabrielle Lyon.
Yeah. Good friend of mine. Yeah.
So she's a friend of mine also, and she's the doctor who I go to for all of my needs. Brilliant. There is no handoff where she could go to a really good coach in a really good gym and explain what she knows and have them just take it from there.
Right.
There needs to be somebody, I believe, in between with an education that is specific to the gap. If we look at the best physical therapists in the world, when I was in practice, I was a chiropractor, but I had patients flying in from around the world to come and see me in clinic. And then when I would push those people into the gym after they saw me, there wasn't a coach in the world that I felt comfortable I could refer these patients to. And so I started working with them remotely. And fortunately, because that's what grew Active Life into a company. But so I believe that there's actually a gap between the full breadth of fitness and the full breadth of medicine that is where we most need to focus on solving the problem. And that's what we're after.
I completely agree. Yeah. And I mean, part of our thing is this health coach practitioner interface, and that there just needs to be much more education and kind of professionalization of that. So yeah, I see exactly the same need there. The handoff sucks right now.
Yeah.
Like if you can find a good functional medicine practitioner and they can figure out your thyroid issue, but then you're handed off to a trainer, a dietitian, or, or whatever mismatch of that stuff is, then there's no continuity of story there. So I see exactly the same challenge.
And I get a lot of pushback from personal trainers and from gym owners and from coaches in the fitness community. It's like, no. What we're doing is getting people off medications. They're losing hundreds of pounds. I'm like, this is not, let me make sure that I'm clear about this. I'm not minimizing what you're doing. You're doing great work. You're fulfilling the full breadth of what fitness could be. When we look at your gym, George over there is still rowing for 2 years when everybody else is running. Mary still has shoulder pain every time she does pull-ups, so she avoids them. Grace, who's in your town, hasn't joined because she doesn't think that you can help her. That's bridging the gap between the full breadth of fitness and the full breadth of medicine. And I think that it takes a very specific kind of professional to do that. And that's our entire mission at Active Life. Humanize healthcare by professionalizing fitness to empower the individual. It's the idea that we can put that person who is passionate about the space between who can actually serve as a bridge.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree I perhaps didn't describe it very well, but in my mind, we have this triage process to figure out metabolically and orthopedically healthy somebody is. Then we figure out where they are. Now they need to plug into some sort of a gym, and it could be like a strength and conditioning facility, it could be jujitsu, it could be yoga. Like I lean towards strength and conditioning because I think you can do so many cool things there. But, even then, this stuff is getting really hybridized. Like our jujitsu gym now runs all kinds of fitness, and they also have yoga. So I think there's opportunities here, but that next piece is that only a tiny fraction of people pick up my book, read it, do it, and can do it on their own to the degree that it takes them to the whatever end zone they're searching for. Like we do these 3 times a year resets where we basically go through the material in Wired to Eat, my second book, and there are folks in there that have followed my work for 10 years and they've never been able to pull this stuff together. But then in the group coaching format, some next layer of people are able to pull it together. But then there's still people that fall through the cracks, and those people need an individual coach, so yeah, I completely agree. Like that interface where, for lack of a better term, like health coaches are kind of the glue that intermediates between a physician of whatever ilk versus the trainer. And, the funny thing in that world, in my mind, is that the purview of the health coach should be pretty broad, but legality wise, they try to make it super constrained. And so everything is super siloed out, and it virtually guarantees that there's no continuity of process. Yeah. Like you have to be willing to be, everybody in the team needs to trust one another so that when the doctor hands the person off to a coach, they trust the coach enough so that they're like, I trust what Charlie's going to say around like the way that the meds are going to interact with the exercise because I've worked with this person and I trust their judgment on it. But, it gets tough because the way that this stuff gets so siloed out, like people need continuity, but what they're getting is super parts and pieces approach because it's kind of the legalization of healthcare and medicine and whatnot.
I think today, a lot, especially as it pertains to the orthopedic stuff, what we're calling a health coach will come to be called an active life professional. That's our goal for a year from now. I would love to chat with off air. I mean, not even off air. I would love to talk about it on air, but I want to be respectful to your time. And I would love to talk to you more either today, another day, whatever it is, about what we're doing and how we're doing it. Because I think that we're speaking very much the same language and filling that gap that you're obviating. I also want to tell you that you've created a problem for me in my life. That problem is Element, drink Element. And the reason why it's a problem is I used to drink a lot of water, and now I always want to drink water with Element in it.
Right.
Like I'll go to the restaurant. And I'm like, I want to be like, you have any watermelon Element you can add to that? But so I think it's such a great product that you created or that you co-founded. And I would love to have you talk about what it is and what the importance of it is. And the thing that I find maybe most interesting about it is how self-regulating it is. Meaning, if it tastes too salty, I don't need it. If it tastes great, I do.
You probably need some.
And I would love to just hear you talk about that a little bit, because my wife is like, how much do I drink? Do I drink it every day? And I'm like, don't drink it at all. It's mine. Don't touch it.
Right. Right.
But I think if it tastes too salty, you're supposed to not drink it. If it tastes good, you're supposed to drink it. I would love for you to talk about what it is, how it works, and how to make those decisions.
Yeah, 4 years ago, we weren't setting out to be like salt moguls. I had been eating a pretty low carb diet. And, I talked about like being able to have the nuance of like a hard charging athlete who eats 200 grams of carbs a day versus 600 grams of carbs a day. And it ended up being a net win. They could still do glycolytic work, but they're not getting like the blood sugar disturbances and everything. My main, activity, I lift some weights, but I mainly do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which even though I try to do a pretty relaxed, not super competition oriented type of game, like it's just a demanding sport. You do 5-minute rounds for 2 hours or an hour and a half at the end of a otherwise vigorous class. And it's like, you're pretty knackered, and I had struggled with how to fuel that process for, ages. And I bumped into a couple of guys, Tyler Cartwright and Luis Villasenor. They're the founders of this thing called Keto Gains. And what I saw in their community was it's a huge community, and people were just crushing it. They were using this kind of appropriate protein, ketogenic diet for body recomposition. People look great. It was mainly females in there. They weren't suffering all kinds of like amenorrhea and thyroid issues. I'm like, what are you guys doing differently? And they're like, well, we definitely make sure we get enough protein. And then we have this electrolyte piece. We make sure that people are dialed in on their sodium in particular. And for a long time, I was in the camp that, sodium has been misrepresented. I kind of vigorously salted my food. So I was like, yeah, okay, that's great, but that doesn't really apply to me because I salt my food and I'm good. And there was kind of a eye roll with these guys because they had heard this explanation like a million times by this point. And so they let me keep floundering around for another year. And they finally said, listen, man, weigh and measure all your food and do it, in like chronometer, where it tells you like your protein, carbs, fat, but your calcium, sodium, magnesium, like the whole ball of wax. And long and short is that I was consuming less than half of what they recommended on the beginning of the sodium story. Like they have like 5 grams per day is the minimum buy-in on this thing. So they told me they're like, do you have any pickle juice? I'm like, yeah, I have some pickle juice. Go drink like 6 or 8 ounces of it. I like pickle juice. So I did. And I swear to God, it was just like a light switch was flipped. And of course, the guy that sells people salt is going to have this amazing story of transformation. But the kind of cool thing is if electrolytes are really the problem that's plaguing you, it's like 5 minutes after you address it, like you feel really, really good, and the most tightly regulated physiological processes in the body are pH and electrolytes. And if they're off by a little bit, you feel horrible or you can die, like every single physiological, or not every physiological process, but every muscle contraction, every nerve impulse is driven by sodium potassium pumps, And so if that's off a little bit, like you potentially are going to feel like garbage and things just aren't going to function all that well. And usually folks don't become aware of electrolyte issues until they start cramping, which is super far down the track. And usually their solution to that is to add more water and potassium, which actually makes the whole damn process worse, So I became aware of this stuff by leaning on some coaches that were much better versed in this area than I am. I'm pretty good at the biochemistry of low carb diets and metabolism and everything, but this whole dramatic need for sodium, particularly in low carb environments, was just not on my radar. So I got super excited about it. And with Tyler and Luis, we spun up this keto aid guide. It was, how to make your own electrolytes. And it's like this much salt, this much potassium chloride, this much magnesium citrate, lemon juice, stevia, shake it up, drink it, and everything's great. And we put up a free downloadable guide on that. And within 6 months, we had 500,000 downloads of it. We were just floored. We're like, holy smokes, this is addressing a really legitimate need. And then mixed into that, as more and more people started doing the keto aid on their own, one, they would say how amazing they felt. Like they just felt way better. All these issues that they had resolved, which was awesome. But then people started mentioning, hey, this is great. But when I travel with the 3 bags of white powder, like TSA doesn't dig that. Have you guys ever thought about doing like a stick pack or something? So we started kicking that idea around. And that's really where this whole thing came from. Like it's crazy when you think about the amount and number of electrolyte products that are out there But when we really looked at what folks needed and really gave an honest assessment of the electrolyte literature, it's like, in general, people need more sodium. They need some potassium, they need some magnesium. But if one provides inadequate sodium to our kidneys, the kidneys do a terrible job of managing calcium, magnesium, potassium. Like it's hard for the kidneys to stay ahead of that, and people don't feel particularly good. If we're getting inadequate sodium, we can run that for a long time because we pull sodium out of our bones. But when we pull sodium out of our bones, we also pull calcium out of our bones. You know, so we can paper over a really significant problem for years until osteoporosis, osteopenia becomes a really big problem. You know, so we found this pain point. We offered a freemium option to try to help people. It really helped a lot of people.
By the way, I want to say the freemium option is a luxury option because it's not freemium that doesn't cost you anything. It's not like the person who is, downloading an app for a week, and if they like it, they have to pay for it. You're sending this stuff in the mail to people.
Right. Well, that's even a later thing. I mean, the freemium thing was just making the keto aid at home.
Got it.
And then, but later we've just, our biggest marketing campaign has been like, reach out to us and you pay $5 for the shipping and we'll send you two of every one of the flavors we have. I'll be straight up honest with that. Every stick pack we can give away, we sell 3.
I believe that wholeheartedly.
And we don't have to tell any magical stories. Like we don't have super special salt from like some Himalayan inner lake that it's the tears of monks that have been concentrated. It's just sodium chloride. We get it from upstate New York. There's nothing fancy about it. We try to source as much as we possibly can from the United States. We have it manufactured in Utah. I think we did a really amazing job on the flavors. Like we spent a lot of time with flavor chemists to make them enjoyable. And I really appreciate that you had honed in on kind of the dosing thing, which if somebody consumes it and it tastes sweet for the most part, they probably need more. If it tastes kind of salty and a little off-putting, you're probably good. Like you don't need a top off on it. And if somebody is eating a standard American diet and they're hypertensive and they're getting tons of sodium from a highly processed diet, they don't need anything like Element. But if they move in any qualitative shift towards a whole food-based diet, their sodium intake plummets, their insulin levels tend to go down. And it's that decrease in the insulin levels that tend to lead to an increased need for sodium. There's this thing called the natriuresis of fasting, where when people fast or eat a lower glycemic load diet, they tend to retain less sodium. And so, then we end up bracketing things. It's like, here are the people who definitely don't need it. Here are the folks that kind of likely do need it. If you consume it and feel better and it tastes good, then you're on point. If you don't really have lethargy or fatigue or cramping or anything, and you take a swig of it and it tastes kind of salty, then you don't need more.
Yeah. It's for anybody listening to this. We will put in the show notes where they can get the 2 of every flavor. Cause I mean, you're not paying me to say this. I'm not a sponsored athlete. It's awesome. It's in my water every day. When I go to the gym, I do 2. When I don't go to the gym, I'll drink 1, and I'm still drinking the same amount of water, but on days that I'm sweating a lot, I'm just adding an extra element to my day, and I feel great, and it tastes great. There's no like acquired taste to it. I've had products where I'm like, you gotta kind of acquire liking it. You'll get used to it. This is not that. I tasted it.
Right.
I had trepidation on like salt water, and then I had my first sip, and I'm like, this is awesome. This is like Gatorade without the guilt.
Yeah. On the Gatorade front, it's worth mentioning. We had a client that went to Florida State University, and there's like the Gatorade Hall of Fame, and there's like a museum there around the whole Gatorade product. And
Florida State or Florida?
Florida State.
Okay.
Is it University of Florida? That's where it was.
Yeah, I think
it's
Gainesville. And naturally, we called it Gatorade.
Okay, Gatorade. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. So they, when Gatorade was first released, each serving was a gram of sodium and much less sugar than what it has today. And over the course of time, the sodium decreased and the sugar increased. So and I don't know, like, what do you draw from that? But I really do think that when Gatorade first hit the scene, it really changed a lot of stuff, and it had some pretty deep insight. There was some old folklore in like kind of football circles, which was if you drink water during a game or practice, you will tend to cramp. So don't do that. It sounds crazy, but when you think about when we sweat, we lose water, but we primarily lose sodium. Your body is becoming disproportionately sodium depleted, which leads into that hyponatremic state. And crazy enough, about the worst thing you could do is just put plain water into that mix because it further dilutes the sodium. And so there's some old, kind of folk wisdom around that made a lot of sense. And they would do salt tablets. So they'd throw a salt tablet in your mouth and kind of chew it up and swallow it and then sip on water to satiety. And that was arguably a much more sane approach to electrolyte management than most of what we see today. You didn't see people dying at football double days, at military boot camps. There weren't really, like marathons and ultra marathons and stuff like that at that point. But every marathon, every ultra marathon, people are hospitalized and occasionally even die from hyponatremia. Like they hit these once every mile rest stops and they shoot just straight water, and they're blowing sodium out of their system super fast because of the cooling, the evaporative cooling of sweating, but they're not replacing the sodium. And then most of the products that are out there are super underpowered in sodium. It's better than nothing, but it compared to doing something like even pickle juice would be a superior, electrolyte beverage to 99% of the stuff that's available out there. So we got lucky again. Like there was kind of right place, right time. We really identified a need, but then we were very contrarian when we looked at the science. We're like, all this renal physiology is saying this, but yet all the medical recommendations are this, and so where did that come from? And it's kind of a long story to unpack all that stuff, but we were very contrarian in that, but we really just focused on something that was convenient, tasted good, and in our mind really addressed the gaps in the electrolyte story.
I love it. I mean, I have no hesitation to say I love it. I don't love all the flavors the same. I don't love all the flavors the same, but I love it. I love the product. And I think that, it's not common that something catches me like that. And I'm like, this is a staple now. I love it. That's
cool.
So great job on it. Rob, where can people find you and information about you and what you're doing if they want to get more?
RobbWolf.com is kind of the main hub. They can find our Healthy Rebellion group, which is a private group that we do resets throughout the year. That's where we're trying to get like 1 million people out of the sick care system. The Main Element website, I do a lot of writing for there. Like we have stuff on intermittent fasting and ketosis and how to kind of dial in your electrolytes. And we've really been digging into a lot of medical conditions that seem to respond favorably to better electrolyte management, like POTS, the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and a bunch of other things like that. But those are kind of the main places. I have some social media accounts, but I put stuff together, give it to my assistant, and she posts it. And I really don't go on social media much anymore because it's just kind of a disaster. So I mainly just hunker in and hang out in my Healthy Rebellion crew for the most part.
Good for you. Did you buy all the domains for all the different ways that people could spell Robb Wolf and have them all forward to the appropriate one?
I don't think so, actually.
Okay.
It's ROBBWOLF. I think we have most of them, but not all of them. Yeah.
Is there an E on the end? Are there 2 Fs? Is there 1 F?
Right.
Yeah. All right. Rob, thank you so much for your time. It was really an honor and privilege to be able to interview you today.
A ton of fun. And, I am really geeked out and excited about the professionalization of the trainer and coach. Mm. And I really do see that as like the missing piece of this integration of healthcare and fitness. Like that is the glue that's going to hold it together. And this is, in my opinion, why it hasn't stuck together. And I know that that's kind of your mission. So if you ever want to circle back around, and just coming from somebody who co-founded some of the very first functional fitness gyms in the world, and watching this stuff now 20 years downstream, I think I could provide some it's biased insight, but it's insight that I think plays really favorably to the story that you're telling. It's like, this is why people need to listen to folks like you. If you want to be in this space and you want to move the needle forward, not just have training be this like slapdickery that it has historically been. Like, you have these isolated individuals that do really good work and they really take their personal development seriously. And maybe they build some relationships with local healthcare providers and whatnot. And that's good. But man, that needs to be like falling off a turnip truck. Like, that needs to be the default mode, not these unique one-off situations. That isn't going to change the world in a favorable way. My
friend JL Holdsworth calls that junk food fitness. You know, everyone likes it. It feels great while you're doing it. And then it's like, did that really make me healthier? I will be as selfish as you will allow me to be, because I have immense reverence for you. I think that you're a consummate professional. You've done incredible things in the industry, and any angle that you would be open to offering for me to be able to come to you and get tapped into your network, get put onto whatever it needs to be, I'm up for all of it. And you're going to have to tell me, Sean, you're being too selfish about this. I need you to pump the brakes.
I don't know that there is too selfish, because, back before the pandemic, I read a piece from the Congressional Budget Office that was projecting that the United States would largely be bankrupt from diabetes related issues by like 2035, and completely uncontroversial. It was basically making this case that diabetes is so expensive to manage that it's going to bankrupt us. And, that timeline has been pulled forward now, because of pandemic and everything else. And I don't know what's going to fix that, but I have this sneaky suspicion that if we could get a couple of 10,000 gyms that are really operating at this high level and they're tied into the healthcare system, you start having impact on a couple of 100 million people at that point, at least tens of millions of people. And you could then have such a wonderful case study of, this group of people is costing the system less and they're healthier, and, on and on and on, that it becomes impossible at that point to totally ignore it.
I think it's important to do that with a group of people who were previously costing the health system more. Yes. It's easy to say this select group of people select this kind of fitness because they're already fit and this is challenging, as compared to this group of people were sitting in the corner unnoticed and they didn't feel welcome in the fitness community. And we created a new angle for them, and look at what it did for the industry. Go ahead.
And real quick, I know you have to scoop, but
I don't. I just want to be respectful of you. I hate when people keep me late.
Good friends of mine, Dr. Bill Cromwell, he's a lipidologist, and he co-founded a company called Precision Health Reports. And these people do basically metabolic screening. It's a pretty inexpensive blood work, and they look at lipoprotein insulin resistance score. And they basically give folks a 10-year prediction of their cardiovascular disease and diabetes risk. And this, in my mind, is a beautiful benchmark for establishing the metabolic health of individuals. Establishing the orthopedic health is a more challenging thing. And that's where you need some physical medicine, professionals to be able to get in and do that. But within our circles, we've been encouraging people. Everybody always goes and gets blood work, but then they're more confused by the end of that than what they were before. And there's actually the interesting thing is the way that they do this stuff. They know with your age and your gender and your ethnicity and all this stuff, they know what your risk profile is. And this plugs into an actuarial table beautifully. And so if someone like you wanted to work with a larger employer or something, it's like, no, I can totally tell you what the risk of these people are today based off you pump them through this blood work. And if we improve their metabolic health, like if their LPIR score goes from 85 to 20, that spread is a savings. It's a projected savings. And it is all evidence-based. This is very well-established stuff. And so then you've got a good justification for either insurance or out of pocket, or, there's a variety of ways to cover that, but I'll introduce you to those guys, and Bill would be a great person to have on. I think because explaining this really nice pinpoint ability to establish metabolic health is, in my opinion, like this is a non-negotiable feature of medicine at this point. We've got to do screening, but we need to do screening that actually tells us something and tells us a risk profile in a today's dollar's value. Mm-hmm. And then if we change that, either good or ill, then we know how we're modifying things. So
I love it. Thank you, Rob.
Absolutely.
Active Lifers, I have a favor to ask you. If you enjoyed the show, we pride ourselves on bringing value to you through the lens of bridging the gap between fitness and healthcare. The best way for you to support this podcast is by reviewing this episode wherever you listen. Please give us a 5-star review and share this episode with a friend. Your support helps so much. Send a screenshot of your review to us on our Instagram account at ActiveLifeRx. As a thank you, we'll gift you a special PDF with the most common mistakes made when working out and how to correct them.